It just makes common sense.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about common sense as we fade out from the Counting Crows' 1999 release Hangin' Around, which was the first track on their third album. Speaking of things that are hanging around, much like the coronavirus, Adam Duritz, the lead singer of the Counting Crows, found himself into a little bit of controversy back in the 90s for this kind of getup. You might know this now as something called cultural appropriation. Oftentimes we'll look at concepts, hear about concepts that seemingly spring up out of nowhere, but have a very, very, very long history. Every subject that you ever hear about has a history and psychological aspect to it. Explore these to understand things better. A much earlier example of accusations of cultural appropriation happened to this guy, Alexander the Great, who adopted several Persian customs, including his dress, which his fellow soldiers really didn't appreciate. If you truly want to understand anything, you've got to dig deep. I have previously cautioned you against reliance on interpretations of interpretations for your source material. In other words, I don't want you to depend on someone else's explanation of the data. You should find the original source and interpret it yourself. If you don't know how to read, research, or interpret the data, you will forever be at the mercy of everyone else to interpret it for you. Take the initiative. Be skeptical. Healthy skepticism, not paranoia. Healthy skepticism. Find out the truth for yourself. The further you get from the source, the more distorted the message. What messages do you currently readily accept that are, in fact, distortions of the truth? This is something worth looking into. You can take, for instance, a popular source for students and professionals alike, Psychology Today. Here we have a Dr. Travers. He's going to tell us the truth about wearing red on a first date. And of course, this must be true because this source has in its title psychology, and it's written by a doctor of philosophy. And as you know, all doctors are trustworthy sources of information no matter what they're talking about. You might consider why even doctors, even these guys over here at Harvard, recommend that you get a second opinion. Why? If the authority on the subject has already told me what's up, why bother with anything else? Why not just trust him always? This leads us to a little something called an appeal to authority, also recognized as something called ethos, and how that is, on occasion, a logical fallacy. Also a necessary component of your speaking and speeches for the rest of your life. Building ethos, but not relying on somebody else's to tell you the truth. If we just take someone else's word for it, in this case Dr. Travers, we will get one side of the story and not the other. And by the way, you might have heard that there are always two sides to every story. That is false. There are always many sides to every story. Let's dive into something a little more controversial than date attire, and it's an argument that you are all very, very familiar with. Is it a good argument?
When you see people and look at the films in China and South Korea, whatever, everybody's wearing a mask. Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
You're sure of it, because people are listening really closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
This is the same reason I don't wear a helmet while riding a motorcycle. People think that wearing a helmet is going to save them from a head-on collision with a semi going 250 miles an hour, but it won't. So why wear one at all?
And often there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face. It could lead to a shortage of masks for the people who really need it.
This is a better part of the argument. At least some of it makes sense. Unintended consequences outweighing the benefits of the solution. But if you remember the beginning of this claim that people should not be wearing masks, His warrants, his reasoning, don't add up. You shouldn't wear a mask because the risk outweighs the reward. Of course, there are also implicit arguments in just about every argument that you're going to evaluate. Here we have an implicit false dichotomy, which is a logical fallacy, of either you wear a medical mask, an N95, and take it from people who need it, or you wear no mask at all, giving the false choice of either this or that, without recognizing or acknowledging that there's a lot in between and outside of those. There usually is. It's important to be very, very specific and only to include your best arguments. Leave out the rest. Masks come in all shapes and sizes. It's one thing to save medical or N95 masks for certain personnel and suggest that the rest of the populace deal with cloth, like most everybody else in the world. But maybe there wasn't enough research on cloth mask use and its effectiveness against viruses. How could we find out? Or maybe there would have been a shortage on cloth itself. What could we look up to find the truth behind that assumption? This is from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is an agency of the government. But it's a place to start, not like the government would ever lie to you, huh? This is just for towels, sheets, and pillowcases found in solid waste by weight. They also include how much is generated. Looks like just in 2018 alone, we got 1.52. This is in thousands of tons. So 1.5 million tons of towels, sheets, and pillowcases in 2018 alone. If we put that into pounds, 2,000 pounds in a ton, we're going to come out to about 3 billion pounds of towels, sheets, and pillowcases generated in 2018 alone. Now, if we only use those for masks, maybe we'll have a shortage of washcloths. Maybe we risk it. And in the end, I guess there's always the innovation of humanity to depend on.
So if you have a physical covering with one layer, you put another layer on, it just makes common sense.
The fundamentals. And the fundamentals are not rocket science. It's universal wearing of masks.
Did Dr. Fauci make the best argument he could at the time, given the circumstances and his knowledge? Have I just taken him completely out of context, misrepresented his argument entirely? According to every fact checker I can see, yes, I completely did. Who are you going to believe? Me? Them? You? Perhaps you want to get a second, third, or fourth opinion.
Common sense.